When we come back, the United States and China at war over currency. The U.S. House of Representatives this week voted to punish China for keeping its currency artificially low. China responded by sending its currency even lower. What does Premier Wen think about all this? Coming up next. Are we on the verge of a trade war between the United States and China? You might think so, given some of the rhetoric from both sides this week. At issue is the renminbi, literally the people's money. It's China's official currency. And the U.S. House of Representatives voted this week to punish China for keeping the renminbi's value artificially low. Why is that a problem? Why does the U.S. care? Because if the renminbi is low, it makes the products that China exports that much more attractive to potential buyers. In other words, it makes China's goods cheaper. After the House voted on Wednesday to place tariffs on Chinese goods to make up for the undervalued currency, the Chinese central bank made a power move. It sent the renminbi's value even lower. What is Premier Wen Jiabao's take on all this? The currency issue is a difficult one, the renminbi. So let me put it to you this way. Despite assurances from China, the renminbi has only appreciated 1.8% in the last 2 years. Is it not in China's interests to allow for a more significant appreciation? Because right now you are subsidizing exporters at the cost of the wages of ordinary Chinese workers. You're risking some inflation, and it creates the very lack of balance that you talk about. So wouldn't it be good for China to allow a more substantial appreciation of the renminbi?
请原谅我评论。
Allow me to make a comment on what you just said. I think your view still represents the view of the United States, or to be more specific, the view of a small number of members of Congress of the United States.
中国经济
The Chinese economy and the US economy are closely interconnected. Our bilateral trade has already reached $300 billion US dollars. US investment in China has exceeded $60 billion US dollars. China has purchased US T-bonds worth about $900 billion US dollars. No one will believe that the Chinese leadership does not follow closely the development of the US economy. Yet, some people in the United States, in particular some in the US Congress, do not know fully about China. They are politicizing the problems in China-US relations, in particular the trade imbalance between our two countries. I don't think this is the right thing to do.
我非常感谢。
I highly appreciate you giving me this opportunity of the interview, because you gave me the opportunity to further explain what the real situation is. There are 3 points which are not widely known with regard to exchange rate of RMB and China's trade surplus.
第一，中国绝不追求贸易顺差。
First, China does not pursue a trade surplus. Our objective in having foreign trade is to have balanced and sustainable trade with other countries, and we want to have a basic equilibrium in our balance of payments.
国际收支的基本平衡。
This is what we have been saying and doing. In 2008, China's surplus in current account's ratio in GDP stood at 9.9%. In 2009, that figure dropped to 5.8%, and in the first half of 2010, that figure further declined to 2.2%. Second, the increase of a trade surplus of a country is not necessarily linked with the exchange policy of that country. We started the reform of RMB exchange rate regime back in 1994, and since then, the Chinese currency has appreciated by 55% against the US dollar. And over the same time frame, the currencies of major economies and currencies of China's neighboring countries have all depreciated by a large margin. China's trade has been growing fast over the same time frame. Actually, there is a period like that in the history of the United States too. In the almost 100 years between the 1870s and 1970s, the United States was a surplus country. And this is actually what would happen for a country in a certain stage of development.
第三，更为重要的，
The third point, which is a more important one and one that you are aware of, that is, the trade imbalance between our two countries is mainly structural in nature. China runs a trade surplus in processing trade, but a deficit in general trade. China has a trade surplus in trade in goods, but a deficit in trade in services. We have a trade surplus with the United States and the European Union, but a deficit with Japan, the ROK, and ASEAN countries. Many of the Chinese exports to the United States are no longer produced in the US, and I don't believe that the United States will restart the production of those products which are at a low end of the value-added chain. Even if you don't buy those products from China, you still have to buy them from India, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh, and that will not help resolve the trade imbalance between our two countries.
其实先生
I remember that you gave the example of iPod player
在美国销售
in the United States. An iPod player is sold at $299 in the States, but the Chinese producer only gets $4 in processing fee.
先生还不知道，
There is another point that I think you may not be aware of, a point that many of the members of the US Congress are not aware of. That is, out of the 50,000 US companies registered in China, 22,000 of them are export companies, and to impose sanctions on export companies in China is tantamount to imposing sanctions on US companies.
We'll be back in a moment with China's Premier Wen Jiabao. What does Premier Wen see for China's future?